This broadcast of the House first aired earlier today.
And I've been called much worse than a despot, so it's not that insulting.
The U.S. president on Friday laughing off the suggestion he's a despot. But for some, the allegation that Donald Trump is trying to rule with absolute authority is no joke. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on the House, former chess grandmaster and Putin critic Garry Kasparov is in Canada. We'll ask him why he's turned his sights on Trump and whether he believes the Epstein files could lead to the U.S. president's decline. Also, the Russian regime tried to kill him twice, then threw him in prison for objecting to the war in Ukraine. Pro-democracy activist Vladimir Kara-Murza on why he went from a Siberian prison camp straight back to activism, and why he believes Russia could be free from Vladimir Putin's grip sooner than we think. Plus, Alberta might be about to get a green light from the federal government on a new pipeline, but BC says they've been left out of the discussion, even though that pipe could cross their turf. Former Liberal cabinet minister and BC MP Jonathan Wilkinson joins us. Could he get behind new tanker traffic in British Columbia? But we begin with a man who has put his life on the line to criticize the Putin regime. The House is now in session. By many accounts, it's incredible my first guest is alive. Vladimir Kara-Murza has been a vocal critic of the Russian regime. He had already survived 2 attempts on his life and still went back to Russia, knowing just how dangerous it could be. He wound up charged with treason for condemning Russia's war on Ukraine and sentenced to 25 years in a Siberian prison camp. During that detention, I spoke with his wife, Yevgenia, on this program about her work to get him released and the effect on their 3 children.
They already saw their father in a coma and then relearning how to walk twice in 2 years. And now they see their father sentenced to 25 years of strict regime in Russia by those people who tried to kill him twice in the past. So, of course, they're absolutely terrified for their father, and they're terrified for our family. And every time I have to leave yet again and I tell them, sorry, they say, no, Mom, it's okay. We understand. We know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Just go and get Daddy back. So I continue.
Well, it worked. In the summer of 2024, Vladimir Kara-Murza was freed in the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. This weekend, he's in Canada attending the Halifax International Security Forum in his role as vice president of the Free Russia Foundation. We spoke on Friday. Mr. Kara-Murza, thank you for making time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
You were quite quick to return to your work as a vocal critic of the Russian regime after your time in Siberia. How much of a struggle was that choice?
Well, to be honest, there was no choice because, for many years before my own arrest, the main focus of my work has been international advocacy on behalf of Russian political prisoners. But now this is also deeply personal for me because I know what it's like. I can feel what it's like with my skin, if you will, to wake up at 5 o'clock every morning in that tiny cell in solitary confinement in a Siberian gulag, to attach your bunk to the wall and then to spend the rest of the day just walking aimlessly in that small circle around the cell. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to speak to. And as we're speaking with you now, there are more than 1,700 known, recognized political prisoners in Russia, in my home country. And this is more than the whole of the Soviet Union held in the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union being 15 different countries put together. And Russia alone today is holding more political prisoners than the USSR 4 decades ago. The levels of political repression in Russia are staggering, are mind-boggling. And for many of these people who have committed no crime, who have broken no law, who are only quote-unquote guilty of having the conscience to distinguish right from wrong and of having the courage to say it out loud, this is a crime in Vladimir Putin's Russia. For many of these people, this is not only a question of unjust and unlawful imprisonment, it is literally a question of life or death. And so I did not have a choice. I did not feel that I had the right to, just to disappear for a few months to I don't know, to transition back to normal, to take care of my health or what have you. Because, the only reason I'm sitting here and speaking with you today is because of the relentless efforts of so many good people in democratic nations, including here in Canada, many of my friends, across the political spectrum, who never stopped advocating, speaking, shouting on behalf of all those people in Russia who are locked up in Putin's prisons, for speaking up against his dictatorship, for calling out his murderous war in Ukraine. This is the only reason I'm alive and I'm here. And so now I feel that duty that Evgenia talked about in that clip you just aired, to speak out on behalf of them, to be their voice. And so there's too much work to do. There are too many issues to speak out for. There are too many people to advocate for. This is not a time for a break.
I heard you say that when the plane took off out of Russia for the prisoner swap, a Russian security official told you, say goodbye to the motherland, and you laughed in his face. You said, I know that I'll be back home in Russia, and it's going to happen much sooner than you can imagine. Why are you so certain of that?
Because I'm a historian. This is my background. This is my education. This was actually something that really helped me when I was in prison. Because, look, none of this is new. All of these things that are happening in Russia today have happened before. And there has not been a dictatorship, a tyrannical, autocratic regime that has not fallen. And so I would place a very strong bet on the fact that, what happens after Putin will be a complete reversal of what we are seeing today. It will be a very important window of opportunity. But this is not to say, of course, that, once Putin is gone, Russia will become a perfect functioning democracy straight away. Obviously not. But it is to say that there will be a very important window of opportunity that will open up in Russia for positive democratic change after the Putin regime is gone. And my overarching concern is that we have to prepare for that moment. We have to prepare for that window of opportunity to make sure we get it right.
I would like to ask you about this 28-point plan from the White House for a resolution between Russia and Ukraine, Russia's war on Ukraine. It proposes that Kyiv give up territory to the east, to partially disarm. Some observers have called it naked appeasement. They say it looks like surrender. And yet Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine has said that this will be a difficult choice for his country. Do you think this plan is likely to be a path out of this war?
Well, from what we have seen in the media, and now officially confirmed both by the White House and the Kremlin and by the Ukrainian government, this is not a peace plan. This is Vladimir Putin's Christmas wish list, because it's just handing him what he always wanted, including handing him, those parts of Ukraine that his army wasn't even able to claim militarily in these almost 4 years of full-scale invasion. I think if there's one very clear lesson from the history of the 20th century, is that appeasing an aggressor never leads to peace. It was tried in Munich in 1938. How did that one work? When I saw those images of Vladimir Putin, an indicted war criminal, being hosted by the President of the United States in Alaska this past summer, walking down the red carpet with him, I had those images in my head of Neville Chamberlain waving that piece of paper after he came back from Munich in the autumn of 1938, when the leaders of Western democracies just gave away a part of Czechoslovakia to Adolf Hitler, and Chamberlain called it peace for our time. It was 10 months before the start of the Second World War. Appeasing an aggressor never leads to peace. And so what I think is fundamental to understand here is that for as long as Vladimir Putin's regime remains in power, for as long as Russia remains a dictatorship, there will be no peace in Ukraine. There will be no peace in Europe. Another very clear lesson from history is that internal repression and external aggression in Russia are always part of the same parcel. When a government does not respect the rights and freedoms of its own people, it is not going to respect the borders of its neighbors. It's not going to respect the norms of civilized international behavior. And so the only true way to guarantee peace and security, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole, is to have political change in Russia. Only with a democratic Russia will there be real peace and security on the European continent.
Canada, like many Western countries, has repeatedly hit Russia with sanctions because of this war on Ukraine. What more would you like to see the West do?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that the sanctions that are currently already are in place, that they be actually enforced and applied in the way that they were intended to. I mean, there are so many glaring loopholes that I see when I look at the way the international sanctions mechanism is operating at the moment. I mean, you just look at the recent report from RUSI, a London-based think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, which showed that up to 30% of military equipment and military technologies used by the Russian army in Ukraine still comes from Western or Western allied sources. This is totally unacceptable. Look at the fact that Putin is still able to illegally sell his oil using the so-called shadow fleet, which is a major source of revenue for his war of aggression against Ukraine. Look at the fact that so many people who are, in the top ranks of this Kremlin dictatorship are still able to freely travel around the Western democratic world. And I could go on. And to me, this speaks to the fact of whether there are powerful interests involved in finding ways around those sanctions, finding loopholes in those sanctions. And I do believe that sanctions absolutely need to be strengthened and enforced. And I'm talking about those sanctions that actually work, the sanctions that make it more difficult and ideally impossible for Putin's dictatorship to continue its criminal war in Ukraine. On the other side of this argument, of course, it's also important to say that I think it is very short-sighted and damaging and counterproductive when some countries, especially some countries on the eastern flank of NATO and the European Union, decide to go for a blanket approach and decide to just ban everybody who just happens to be a Russian citizen. Anybody with a Russian passport no longer able to get visas, cross borders, drive cars, and so on. This is the biggest gift to Putin's propaganda you can think of, because, for years and years, the Kremlin has been telling Russian citizens that, these Westerns, they're Russophobes, they hate all of you. And every time something like this actually happens, that just plays directly into the hands of Putin's propaganda. And so those types of sanctions are totally ineffective and counterproductive. But the sanctions that actually are intended to limit Putin's war machine, there's a lot of room for improvement in that area.
We only have a moment left, but, you talked about that Russia that you envision yourself returning to. I imagine you would want to bring your children with you. What do you see that you want the rest of the world to see in that brighter future for Russia?
Well, frankly, that future is already there, and that hope is already there. Sometimes hope comes out of the darkest place, and we began this conversation by talking about the horrendous levels of political repression in Russia, with more than 1,700 recognized political prisoners, with not a day going by without another news story about somebody being arrested or detained or indicted or charged under administrative articles and so on. And of course, on the one hand, this is totally heartbreaking to see it. But on the other hand, it also shows how many people there are in Russia who are not willing to look the other way, who are not willing to stay silent and become essentially passive accomplices to the crimes committed by the Kremlin regime. Just a few weeks ago, members of a music group in St. Petersburg called Stop Time were placed under arrest for performing anti-war songs on the streets of St. Petersburg, and their performances would always draw, dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. And these musicians, they're kids. The lead guitarist of the band, named Alexander Orlov, on the way to the courtroom where they were taken under arrest, he proposed to the lead singer of that band. Her name is Diana Loginova. He wrapped a ring, a makeshift ring, out of a paper napkin. He proposed to her. She accepted, and it was sitting in that courtroom, laughing and smiling, despite everything that is happening around them, in defiance, of these armed and masked police officers and everything. And I was just looking at these images, and on the one hand, it is totally heartbreaking to see that these kids being persecuted by Putin's machine of repression. But on the other hand, I'm looking at them, the people who are choosing to remain free in what today is a very unfree country. Alexander is 22. Diana is 18. They are the future of Russia. And a septuagenarian dictator in the Kremlin is not.
Vladimir, it was very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Former detainee and vice president of the Free Russia Foundation, Vladimir Kara-Murza. As dissidents like Kara-Murza hope to one day see a democratic Russia, others warn about a democracy in jeopardy much closer to home, the United States of America. Garry Kasparov is a former chess grandmaster who fled Putin's regime in 2013. He has written about the parallels between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Today, he's the founder and chairman of the Renew Democracy Initiative, and he writes a newsletter called The Next Move. I spoke to him Friday afternoon while he, too, was at the Halifax International Security Forum. Mr. Kasparov, welcome to the House.
Thank you very much for having me.
After Donald Trump came into office for his second term, you wrote about the Putinization of America. What are some of the most important parallels you see?
There are too many to count, and it's sometimes it's just, visual. Sometimes it's just a smell. I grew up in the Soviet Union. I learned about KGB not from the books, but from personal experience. If you want one criteria, it's a privatization of power. And one of the illustration was the so-called Doge activity that destroyed some of the agencies. But few people in America understand that, this is you cannot simply, eliminate government offices because the power is power. And if it's being lost somewhere, it's being gained elsewhere. So Donald Trump is still very successful by accumulating more and more power either in his hands or in the hands of his cronies at the expense of the traditional system that has been functioning in America for 250 years called the balance of power.
You talk about the smell, your own personal experience, and yet the United States has been a democracy for 250 years. Russia has never truly been a full-fledged democracy. What would you say to the idea that America is in a better position to withstand some of these pressures?
This is not something we should argue. Of course, in America, our chances to stop this crawling privatization of power, the rise of the authoritarianism, are much, much better than in Russia. In Russia, I think we were doomed because you were probably very modest saying Russia was not full-fledged democracy. It was a very short moment. Historically, it's kind of it's a nanosecond in history, and we missed our chance to jump into this open door and to join the family of civilized nations. And it ended up with KGB dictatorship again, because as you said, Russia never had strong democratic traditions and institutions to rely upon. America is different, but let's give Donald Trump credit. For 10 years, if you start counting from his first appearance in Oval Office, he has been pushing this line again and again, and with quite a dramatic success. Many things that were totally inconceivable 10 years ago, today people just, it's all like a yawn. Okay, what else you can do about it? Just think for a moment, Watergate was about president lying and, exceeding his powers. It happens every day. Every hour we live through Watergate and nobody cares.
In that regard, I want to ask you about something that he put online this week. Comments he made where he seemed to suggest that some Democrats should be executed, although he has now said that's not his meaning. He's talking about Democrats who made a video saying members of the military are not required to obey illegal orders. In response, Trump wrote, "Seditious behavior punishable by death." He shared a post from someone else that says, "Hang them, George Washington would." Vladimir Putin doesn't joke about his enemies. He has disposed of his enemies. Trump is not about to turn around tomorrow and execute Democrats. So how do you make sense of comments like those?
As we say in Russia, every joke has an element of a joke. Yes, Trump was joking, but that's very deep down. That's what he believes he could do. He believes in absolute power. It's not, I'm telling you, he has been repeating it many times. He thinks that the different branches of power, it's an obstacle on the way of president to execute his kingly powers. And it's not just him. We heard his inner circle repeating that and the way they attack the judges. So Trump would go as far as we allow him to go. It's probably a little bit early to talk about shooting the opposition leaders, but this is what Trump believes. And I always say that, when you're dealing with this kind of a person, you should take them seriously.
I hear where you are going with this argument, Mr. Kasparov, but we don't know what he believes. You say this is what he believes. We don't truly know.
Yeah, providing that he keeps lying all the time, so we may judge even his statements when he talked about absolute power of the president. But everything he does, everything he says, has only two key criteria. It's personal glory or personal enrichment. That's it.
When you look at the furor over the Epstein files right now, the way it is splintering his coalition, Some people have wondered if this might be the thing that leads to his political decline. What do you think?
Probably. I hope so. That a lot of people will see that as many of the Donald Trump statements should not be taken at face value. I'm still curious, how come that they pushed not just Donald Trump, but his entourage and his supporters, J.D. Vance included, pushed for Epstein files to be open. Naturally, there are many Democrats there. Top Democrats, and that's probably why Biden administration was very shy and decided not to open these files. But the pushing it and knowing that Trump or we don't know, maybe some members of Trump's family are just somehow mentioned not in a very appropriate way. So it's again typical Trump.
You're speculating there, though. You're not.
No. I'm purely speculating. And we're all speculating. By the way, the only way for us to stop speculating is to open the files, without any reductions. Again, it's amazing because Trump, lives with the moment now. Now it served him. Okay, it was 2 years ago. It served him to attack Biden administration and Democrats for not opening Epstein files. Today, it serves him not to open files. And Donald Trump doesn't care what he said yesterday because that's another element of authoritarianism. When it's not, the true statement is not what the leader said yesterday, but what he said today, actually now. And tomorrow or next hour, it could be different.
Your session at the Halifax Security Forum is called Democracies Don't Despair. What would your message be to Canadians and others about why this should not be a time for despair?
If we get desperate, we'll lose. So I don't think we have any choice. We have a responsibility to defend democratic institutions, not only in our countries, in America or in Canada, but also elsewhere. Because what happens in America, the health of American democracy will resonate around the globe. And if America goes in the wrong direction, just think what will happen elsewhere in Taiwan, in Ukraine, in Venezuela, in Iran, and many other places. If we have numbers, if we mobilize people, if we make majority of the free world recognize what's at stake and to get involved, I think we have numbers and we have traditions and we have values on our side.
Just this week, you wrote that the next U.S. president must be weaker, that this person would need to give up some of the power in the Oval Office that's gained over the last few decades. That would be asking essentially the most powerful person on earth to cut themselves down to size. How much hope do you have that will happen?
Yes, but in America, if we recall the Constitution, president is in Article 2. So Article 1, it's the United States Congress. It's not just about goodwill of a person who will run, he or she, and hopefully win in 2028, but it's about the coalition that's to be built that will include this very important element of redistribution of power, bringing back power to the House, and also creating more and more checks on executive office. Because many things in America that we thought were inconceivable, they were not built on the code of law, but on a tradition. Unfortunately, Donald Trump proved to us tradition is not enough. We have to codify the law. We have to make sure that another Donald Trump, if God forbid he or she comes out, in the next few decades, will not have the same chance to threaten the very foundation of American democracy.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Former chess grandmaster and founder and chairman of the Renewed Democracy Initiative, Garry Kasparov. So, as global politics roil here in Canada, the international competition for one big military contract is heating up.
We didn't get enough when it comes to the F-35s. The industrial benefits are not enough. There needs to be more jobs created out of the F-35 contract. That's clear to me and clear to this government. And at the same time, we think that we can use military procurement to get more. And that is why we're looking indeed at the Gripen, and we're having conversations with SAB.
Industry Minister Melanie Joly casting more doubt on just how many F-35 fighter jets Canada is prepared to buy from the United States. 16 of those jets will be delivered soon, but it's unclear whether the Canadian government will purchase the full fleet of 88 as planned. Why? Well, the King and Queen of Sweden were in Ottawa this week with an offer that might be hard to turn down. The Swedish Saab's Gripen fighter jets came second to the F-35s in the bidding process, and now it's coming up with a promise of up to 10,000 Canadian jobs. So, should we stick with the initial plan or give this new Swedish suitor a chance? Murray Brewster is the CBC senior defense correspondent. Thanks for joining me, Murray.
You're welcome. Swedish suitor.
Indeed. So I don't know, is this like a flirt off? Is it a dog fight? I don't know what we're going to call it. But the Swedish company Saab, they are, as I said, promising thousands of jobs. Lockheed Martin in the U.S. says the contract that Canada already has with them is worth billions in industrial value for Canada. So walk us through this back and forth that's been playing out this week.
Well, it was a full royal court Swedish press this week. I've never seen anything like it in terms of the diplomatic, economic, corporate kind of push that we witnessed this week. We had, of course, the King and Queen. We had the Deputy Prime Minister. We had the Defense Minister. There was the CEO of Saab. And everyone was here. And while the royal family would not have been trying to sell the aircraft, it's certain that it was implicit in all of the other conversations. And I mean,
one does not lower oneself to selling aircraft, but they bring a little razzle-dazzle.
They do bring a little razzle-dazzle. And so, I mean, the question that has been posed by Melanie Joly is, can they get any better benefits from Lockheed Martin and the F-35? No, maybe, but Canada has a very strict policy when it comes to military procurement. Essentially, if Canada's going to contract with a defense contractor, it's going to be a dollar for dollar investment. But that's not how the F-35 deal works. The F-35 deal was, we have paid to be in a club for the last 20 years, and that gives our companies the opportunity to bid. So where is the room for Lockheed Martin to be able to sweeten the pot, if I can put it that way? Would they want to sweeten the pot? That's a really open question. But if they do, then you're going to have other partners within the F-35 program going, hey, what about us? Yeah. So it's a real problem for them. Now, on the flip side, you have the CEO of Saab, who earlier this week had said that the company could set up a manufacturing and assembly plant here and a research and development, which sort of supports their claim that as many as 10,000 direct and indirect jobs could be part of it. That's really suspect because Saab has put together an assembly plant in Brazil, and that's not delivered anywhere near that kind of economic benefit to that country. So can Saab deliver? That's a really open question as well.
Okay, so this push and pull, the question of who can really live up to what is on offer. One thing we do know, it seems like the Americans are less than thrilled with some of the response that they've been hearing from Canada. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra this week sort of tying this to broader trade negotiations. Help us understand what's going on there.
Well, the Americans have long been annoyed with the fact that the federal government is reviewing the F-35 deal. The ambassador has said on many occasions that he just doesn't think it's right and that he's even waded into military strategy. So it's not his comments this past week were not surprising whatsoever. But you talk to folks within the federal government and they say that there is no linkage here. Canada's not using the F-35 as a bargaining chip, even though it looks that way.
Okay, well, far be it from me to ruin the suspense, Murray, but when do you think this is going to get sorted out?
I think the government's going to take its time. A lot's going to hang on the review. However, I think that the government is probably going to come up with some kind of creative solution that will see Canada remain as part of the F-35 program, but also become involved with and have a second fighter jet option in the country with the Saab Gripen and all of the potential jobs that come with it.
Fascinating stuff, certainly high stakes. Thank you for bringing us up to speed.
You're welcome.
CBC senior defense correspondent Murray Brewster. Up next on the House podcast, British Columbia and Alberta could be headed for a pipeline showdown. We'll talk to former Environment Minister and BC MP Jonathan Wilkinson about the prospect of at least partially lifting the West Coast tanker ban. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Give us a follow so you never miss an episode. And tell us what you think of the show. Leave us a review or email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. We could be on the cusp of a major move forwards towards a new oil pipeline. The Prime Minister and Premier Danielle Smith have been personally involved in negotiations about Alberta's energy sector for months. And the Alberta Premier's office says they are now in the final stages. But there's at least one problem. That pipeline would likely travel to BC's northwest coast. And while Saskatchewan's Premier says he has been looped into the talks, BC Premier David Eby says it's all news to him.
I almost fell out of my seat when I heard Scott Moe say that he was part of these conversations and was helping in these discussions, which I was completely unaware of, between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the federal government about what happens in British Columbia.
A new pipeline would also require some sort of pause or workaround for the BC tanker ban put in place by Justin Trudeau's Liberals. BC's government seems to be giving it a hard pass.
It's like explaining to a vegetarian that, they'll still be a vegetarian if they eat a few steaks.
Well, Jonathan Wilkinson is the federal Liberal MP for North Vancouver-Capilano. He was previously both Environment Minister and Minister of Energy and Natural Resources under Justin Trudeau. He was briefly a minister under Mark Carney as well. Welcome back to the House.
Thank you very much.
You heard your Premier there. He's pretty unimpressed that he's not involved in these talks. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm not entirely surprised. I mean, it's very normal for the federal government to have bilateral conversations with provinces about things of particular interest. I would say that it's important, I think, that BC and the federal government have similar conversations. And ultimately, to be honest with you, I think it would behoove Alberta to be reaching out to Premier Eby to have those conversations with him. But certainly, if Premier Eby has questions and concerns, I would just say, reach out to Prime Minister Carney or to Energy Minister Tim Hodgson, because, these are important conversations that definitely involve the interests of British Columbia.
But do you understand why he might be a bit miffed when he hears that Saskatchewan is already part of these conversations?
Well, I can understand his concern, but what I would say is I think he should be comforted by the fact that the Prime Minister has said that, for major projects, irrespective of what those projects are, that they will be seeking the support of the jurisdictions that are impacted, that are involved in the project. And I do think that there are significant conversations that are going to have to happen with Premier Eby and his government about this project, and to be honest, with impacted First Nations, including the coastal First Nations.
Do you believe that those coastal First Nations and the BC government can be won over?
Well, I don't want to prejudge that. I think the concerns that coastal First Nations have had, and I think that Premier Eby has expressed, relate to the ability to navigate in an area that's not simple, that the ability to have the infrastructure to be able to manage this kind of traffic and to address any incidents that might occur. And I think that I wouldn't prejudge the outcome of it, but certainly, those folks have expressed some significant concerns, and I honestly think it behooves the government of Alberta in particular, who is very, very keen on this idea, to be reaching out directly.
What about you? Where do you stand? Is this something you could get behind?
Well, look, I think there are a number of things that need to be checked off. For me, there needs to be, as for the Prime Minister, as he said, there needs to be significant Indigenous support. That's not necessarily unanimity. I mean, it wasn't in the case of Trans Mountain. There needs to be conversations with British Columbia. I mean, these kinds of things imposed on a province would be pretty tricky. And to be honest, if you thought about it in the context of other provinces, I think would not be done very often.
But tricky is not impossible, is I guess what this may come down to.
Well, again, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of this. I mean, I do think that people actually have to sit down at a table and have adult conversations. But, for me, the other issue for sure is, how you address the incremental emissions that would be associated with the production of oil in Alberta that would go into this pipeline, and making that consistent with Canada's commitments and obligations under climate change. That's not impossible, but it certainly would require some work. And let's not forget, I mean, right now, there is no proponent for this project. At the end of the day, you will have to find a company or a set of companies that are willing to put up billions of dollars for a project that will take a number of years to build. So at the end of the day, there are a number of things that need to be worked through. And I think everybody should just take a little bit of a step back before we box ourselves into corners.
You were both Environment Minister and Energy and Natural Resources Minister, as we said, under Justin Trudeau. In 2015, you and your fellow Liberals, you ran in part on creating the BC tanker ban. Could you defend to the people in your riding partially lifting it now?
So, I mean, people are focused on the ban, and I would say, well, what underlies the reason for the ban? You put a ban into place for certain reasons, right? And there are really two reasons that underpin the ban. The first is that it is a tricky navigation area, and there isn't the infrastructure to ensure that these kinds of things can be done in a way that would give British Columbians comfort. So can you address all of those issues? And the second is there was a lot of opposition on the part of coastal First Nations. And so how do you engage the conversation with coastal First Nations on those issues, and can you actually generate reasonable support? If you can get both of those things, well, that's the reason why the ban exists. But, those are not insignificant challenges to overcome.
It sounds like the Prime Minister still has to win you over, Jonathan Wilkinson.
No, I mean, I think everything I'm saying is pretty much exactly what Mark Carney has been saying, which is there are a number of things that actually have to be put into place. And that's not just for this project, that's for all projects. When he set up the Major Projects Office and created the list, he made a number of commitments in terms of conditions. And certainly one of them was that there would be significant Indigenous engagement and there would need to be support. And that doesn't mean unanimity, but it does mean significant support.
You have said many times that fighting climate change was a big part of the reason you got into politics. How do you feel about a prime minister who might put out his own plan that would permit a new oil pipeline before he puts out a detailed climate plan?
Well, I think this would really push the government to put out that detailed climate plan. In the House this week, the Prime Minister recommitted to the Paris Agreement targets that were put into place when I was the Environment Minister. That's not simple in the current context, particularly given some of the challenges that President Trump has created for us. But his commitment is an important one. And I do think that we will want to see the government put in place measures to ensure that we can actually pursue those targets. That's true of this project. It's true of all projects.
Well, I would just flag again, though, that pursue isn't meet, right? I mean, climate groups are clear. When it comes to 2030, all indications are those targets are going to be missed.
So without a doubt, those things are challenging. And I have said publicly that they were always going to be challenging. I mean, when we put into place the climate plan when I was the Environment Minister, we developed a plan which was the first plan to be able to actually say we could meet a target, which was the 30% target. And in the aftermath of it, we raised it to 40% because we were looking to be ambitious and ensure that we were moving in accord with what science said. We figured out how to get to 36. We had a decade to try to figure out how to get the last 4%. And I think the government has a similar challenge, which is to look at where we're at and to try to figure out what can be done to be able to actually continue on the path of reducing emissions. And let's be clear, we have bent the curve on the emissions. Emissions are on their way down, where they were on their way dramatically up under Stephen Harper. So there are challenges for, the new Environment Minister and the new Energy Minister and the Prime Minister, but the commitment is there. This is a Prime Minister who knows and believes that climate change is real and it is something that we must address.
Earlier this year, we had David Lametti on the show, now the UN ambassador, and he seemed to acknowledge that you and Bill Blair were also destined to ambassadorial roles. In your case, it sounds like it's the European Union. So I want to ask you in closing, you ready for a new job, Jonathan Wilkinson?
Well, I'm not sure how David Lametti would know that because I haven't spoken to him since the election. So, but
he was an advisor to Prime Minister Carney until he took on this role. So
yeah, fair enough. Look, I have said to the Prime Minister that I got into politics to serve. I was after a long career in the private sector. I am interested in serving, yes, my constituents, but I'm also interested in serving the broader interests of Canada. And if there's something that I can do in that regard, I am open to that conversation. So I have not made any specific decisions, but it is something that certainly I am open to.
Okay. Interesting times ahead. Thank you very much for taking the time for this conversation.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Vancouver Liberal MP and former Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. We count on the justice system to protect us. But a new report says it systematically betrays some Canadians. That report is from the ombudsperson for victims of crime. And he's talking about the experiences of sexual assault survivors, people like Jessica Baker. In 2016, she was sexually assaulted by musician Jacob Hogarth. He's currently serving a 5-year prison sentence. Baker has gone public with her identity and her experience in a new CBC documentary, where she describes her treatment in the justice system as being worse than the actual crime.
Going to court was like a second assault, and worse, because you're sitting in front of the person that did the worst thing possible to you, and their defense lawyer is hired to make you feel like you are nothing.
She's not alone in those feelings. So why are practices still in place, like giving the court access to a survivor's therapy records? And why are so many sexual assault cases being withdrawn or stayed? Benjamin Robach is the federal ombudsperson for victims of crime. Welcome to the House.
Thanks for having me.
What is it that you most want people to understand about just how difficult it is for some people to report a sexual assault in Canada right now?
Well, my heart goes out having heard that introduction. I think we heard from too many people that their experience with the criminal justice system was more painful or worse than what had happened to them, than the sexual assault itself. And if that's our baseline, we have a lot of work to do. And so we really do want to see some change. Survivors are asking for change. Advocates are asking for change. And I think I'm hopeful that now's a moment. If we can really listen and stop and make some good, informed choices, I think we can build something better.
You drew on thousands of pieces of information, including surveys with 1,000 survivors of sexual assault. In your report, you say, the harm is so well recognized, this is the harm by the system, that police officers and Crown attorneys regularly caution survivors against reporting or pursuing charges. The administration of justice is in open disrepute. Should we be shocked by that?
I don't think it's a surprise, because the media is filled with stories from sexual assault survivors that are describing their really painful experiences. I think where it really stood out to me was our lead investigator, Huri, who's the most amazing human being. She had done a group where a judge was participating, and one of the questions that was posed was, if your daughter was sexually assaulted, would you recommend that she reports? And the judge had a hard time with that question and said no. And that, it's hard to fathom, and I feel like I'm in such a difficult place because I don't want to stop people from reporting, and I don't want to make anyone less safe. But we do have to talk honestly about what's happening and find those ways forward.
So help us understand a bit more about what is happening in the system right now. You mentioned in the report the practice of so-called KGB statements. What are those, and how are they being used right now?
Right. So KGB statements, and it has nothing to do with secret police. It's really, it's from a Supreme Court decision with the initials KGB. But it's a particular caution that's given for an interview with the police where the person is informed that lying to the police is a criminal offense. And if they lie, they could go to jail. And the typical script to provide the warning includes multiple mentions, often 4 mentions, of the possibility of going to jail for 5, 10, 14 years, which is often more than what somebody would get for a sexual assault anyway. And sometimes police try to cushion the blow and go off script. And somebody who participated in the study had a transcript where there were 22 mentions of jail time.
And so what does that do to someone? What are the people who were involved telling you the effect is on them when a police officer speaks to them that way?
Well, one of the main reasons that survivors told us they're not reporting is because they don't expect to be believed by the police. And so if the setup for that first conversation, or when you come in to really give your statement, you're told that, there's consequences to lying, consequences to being a liar. It doesn't set up the conditions to participate safely, and it feels really heavy. And then they're going to go into a justice system where part of the job of the defense counsel is to make it look like they're lying. And so it makes really unsafe conditions.
I just want to be crystal clear. The potential jail time would be for giving a false statement.
That's right, yeah.
So some people are going to hear that, and they're going to say, well, a false statement would ruin someone's life. And I understand that these are difficult decisions to make, but the bar should be high. What would you say to people who are thinking about that side of the equation?
I think it's really important if we want to support the actual truth-seeking function of the court, which is the whole point. We want the truth to come out. We have to create conditions that promote truthfulness. And the threatening approach doesn't do that. We know from a trauma-informed perspective that when people feel safe, they're going to give their best evidence. And I do want to maybe clarify that this is not a common practice, KGB statements. They're not used in a lot of the country. They're often not used with just sexual assault. But when it starts to intersect with partner violence and sexual assault, where they're afraid that the survivor might change their mind or not come back, then it's the process that can be used to make sure those statements are still admissible in the future.
Many people may not realize that a complainant's therapy records can also be used in court. What impact does that have on the complainant?
It's devastating. I think this is one of the areas where I feel most passionate about in the investigation. One of the reasons that we launched it was a complaint from a survivor who was going through a sexual assault trial where the accused subpoenaed 7 years of her therapy records. And she said that she felt like all that time her counselor was taking notes for the defense. And so suddenly, at the time when she's most in crisis during this trial, we know that there's an increased risk of suicide and other mental health challenges. She was cut off from access to mental health care. And it's a completely unsafe position, and she recognized that for herself. So we actually went to court with her, and she asked the judge to discontinue the proceedings because she felt like nobody should have the right to invade that part of her privacy and her mind. It wasn't fair. And she wanted the case built on the evidence, not those inner thoughts.
There is also the question of cases being dismissed because the delay in getting to trial is too long. We know this is an issue throughout the justice system, but what did you find about sexual assault trials in particular?
Yeah, so sexual assault cases are the most likely of violent offenses to be stayed under the Supreme Court decision of R.V. Jordan, which puts this timeline on cases. So either 18 months or 30 months from the time that a charge is laid to the end of the justice process. So in 2022, 2023, sexual assault cases were 2.3 times as likely to pass the Jordan timelines and be withdrawn or dismissed, which I think that data is well known. I think what's not well known that we bring a lot of attention to in the report is how everything else is affected by that Jordan decision, from decisions of when to lay a charge to preemptively withdrawing cases because they're likely to pass the Jordan timeline. And so, you know, at some point, if you know that the scheduled trial date is going to be past the Jordan timeline, then the reasonable prospect of a conviction is dissipating. And so many cases are ended and they're not in the statistics.
I want to ask you in closing that difficult question that judge was wrestling with. If someone you loved was trying to make a decision about whether or not to come forward with the system as it is right now, what's the most important thing you would say to them?
I think there are a lot of shining lights in that system, despite the challenges. There's people who are listening, and there's people who are doing their best, and they're championing spaces for survivors. There's sexual assault centers that are on the ground that will listen, and they will care for you, and they can provide support. I think we have to move past a place where people feel like they have to carry the load on their own. We have to help each other. We need alternatives to the court system as well. We need options for people to have help to address these things, whether it's through restorative justice or transformative justice, but nobody should have to hold on to it. So I'd say get help, get legal advice. In all of Canada, there's programs that are set up to give you access to independent legal advice if you've experienced a sexual assault. But we don't have a requirement to tell victims what their rights are. Like the accused. So I'd say speak with independent legal advice, speak with a sexual assault center, and they can help you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to tell us about the work that you and your team did. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
Benjamin Roebuck is the federal ombudsperson for victims of crime. And a reminder, there is support for anyone who has been sexually assaulted. Go to endingviolencecanada.org to find out about resources in your area. Before we go, a correction from last week's show. I misspoke when I introduced one of our guests. The Vice President of the Infectious Diseases and Vaccinations Programs Branch at the Public Health Agency of Canada is Dr. Natasha Crowcroft. Okay, that is it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Stephen, Victoria Valido, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Technical production by Gabriel Marino. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.